Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. Picture this. You wake up one Tuesday morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 300 miles from the nearest ocean. Your 2019 Honda Civic is parked in your driveway, same as always. But there's something wrong. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that makes your coffee mug slip from trembling fingers and shatter on your kitchen tiles. Barnacles, dozens of them, growing on your car's hood like pale, crusty tumors. Now, I know what you're thinking. Barnacles don't grow on cars, especially not in Iowa. But stick around, because what happened to me over the next 7 days will make you question everything you think you know about the natural world. And maybe check your own driveway a little more carefully tonight. The story is now going to start. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a practical guy. I work IT support for a medical supply company in Cedar Rapids. I drive a reliable Honda, pay my mortgage on time, and the most exciting thing in my life is usually deciding between Netflix or Hulu after dinner. That Tuesday started normal enough. I'd overslept because my phone died overnight. Again. Classic Marcus. I stumbled to the kitchen in my boxers and Cubs t-shirt, started the coffee, and glanced out the window to check if it was raining. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought someone had dumped garbage on my car. Maybe those kids from down the street. Jamie's always talking about pranks on TikTok. But as I squinted through the morning light filtering through my maple tree, the shapes looked organic, attached. I grabbed my coffee and stepped onto the front porch in my bare feet. The October air bit at my ankles, but I barely noticed. There were maybe 30 of them clustered on my hood, each about the size of a silver dollar. They had that distinctive cone shape. Rough, grayish-white shells with darker ridges. I'd seen enough Discovery Channel documentaries to recognize barnacles when I saw them, but that was impossible. I walked closer, my heart doing this weird stuttering thing in my chest. The dew on my grass soaked through my socks, but I kept moving forward like I was in a trance. Up close, they looked absolutely real. I could see the intricate spiral patterns on their shells, the way they clustered together in irregular patches. One of them, near the Honda emblem, was slightly open, and I swear I saw something dark and wet inside. Moving. I reached out with one finger, hesitant. The shell felt exactly like I expected. Hard, rough, with those sharp little ridges that could cut if you weren't careful. It was firmly attached to my car's paint, like it had been growing there for months. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my boss. Running late again. I'd completely forgotten about work. I took a step back, nearly tripping over my own feet. This was insane. I was standing in my driveway in Iowa, touching barnacles that were somehow growing on my car. Barnacles that belonged in tide pools and harbor walls, not suburban driveways surrounded by cornfields. I ran inside, threw on the first clothes I could find, and grabbed my laptop. 15 minutes of frantic Googling later, I had my answer. There was no answer. No documented cases of barnacles growing on cars. No scientific explanation for how marine organisms could survive, let alone thrive, hundreds of miles from salt water. But there they were. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 3 times in 5 years. I spent the rest of the day researching, making phone calls that went nowhere. The local university's marine biology department thought I was pranking them. The folks at the Natural History Museum in Des Moines were polite, but clearly skeptical. By evening, I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. Stress could cause hallucinations, right? Maybe I'd been working too many late shifts, drinking too much coffee, not getting enough sleep. But when I checked on the car before bed, they were still there. If anything, they looked slightly bigger. Wednesday morning brought more barnacles. I counted 47 on the hood alone, plus a new cluster forming along the passenger side door handle. These new ones were smaller, like baby barnacles, if that was even a thing. I made a mental note to Google barnacle reproduction later, then immediately felt ridiculous for adding that to my research list. I tried scraping one off with a butter knife. Bad idea. The thing was attached so firmly that I ended up scratching my paint, and when I finally pried it loose, it left behind this root system. Thread-like tendrils that had somehow worked their way into microscopic cracks in the clear coat. The detached barnacle continued moving in my palm for nearly 30 seconds, a slow, pulsing motion that made my skin crawl. I dropped it on the driveway and watched it go still. That night, I set up my old webcam to record the car overnight. If these things were growing, I wanted proof. I angled it from my bedroom window and let it run from midnight to 6 a.m. What I saw in the footage made my hands shake so badly I had to watch it 3 times to be sure. They moved. Not constantly, but in small, coordinated waves every 20 to 30 minutes. The larger ones would open slightly, revealing dark, wet interiors while the smaller ones pulsed in rhythm. It looked almost like breathing. But the truly unsettling part came around 3:17 a.m. The footage showed something I hadn't noticed before, a thin, almost transparent film connecting the barnacles. In the infrared view from my security camera, it looked like a web of veins spreading across my car's surface. By Thursday, the barnacles had spread to the windshield. I woke up to find a line of them growing along the bottom edge of my windshield, right where it met the hood. They were small, maybe the size of nickels, but they obscured part of my view. Driving to work became an exercise in leaning left and right to see around them. My coworkers started asking if I was okay. Jennifer from accounting said I looked peaked, which I guess was her polite way of saying I looked like death. I'd been surviving on energy drinks and whatever was left in my fridge, too distracted to shop for groceries or cook real meals. That evening, I tried a different approach. I called my Uncle Dave in Portland, the closest thing to a boat person in my family. He'd spent 20 years in the Coast Guard and knew more about marine life than anyone else I could think of. "Barnacles in Iowa?" Dave laughed. "Marcus, you been hitting the cooking wine?" I sent him photos. The laughing stopped. "Jesus, kid, those look real." His voice went serious. "But that's impossible. Barnacles need salt water to survive. They filter feed on plankton and microscopic organisms. Even if someone dumped a bunch of them on your car as a prank, they'd die within hours in fresh water." "So, what are they?" "I have no idea. But Marcus, be careful, okay? If these things are somehow alive and growing in Iowa, that means they've adapted to something we don't understand. Evolution doesn't work that fast unless there's pressure. Big pressure." After we hung up, I sat in my living room staring out at my car. The streetlight cast long shadows across the barnacle clusters, making them look like tumors in the darkness. What kind of pressure could make ocean creatures adapt to survive in a landlocked suburb? By Friday morning, my entire car looked diseased. The barnacles had spread across both sides, the roof, and were starting to cluster around the tires. The larger ones on the hood had grown to the size of ping-pong balls, and when I got close, I could hear a faint clicking sound coming from inside them. I'd called in sick again. My boss left a voicemail that was professionally concerned but clearly irritated. I played it back twice before deleting it. Work felt like a concept from another lifetime. The real problem wasn't just the barnacles anymore. It was what they were doing to my car. The metal beneath them had started to corrode. Not rust, something else. The paint had taken on a greenish tint, and the chrome around my windows was developing dark stains that looked almost organic. When I touched the affected areas, they felt spongy, like the metal itself was changing. I made the mistake of pressing harder on one spot near the driver's side mirror. My finger sank into what should have been solid steel like it was wet clay. The surface gave way with a soft, squelching sound that made my stomach lurch. When I pulled my hand back, there was a depression in the metal, shaped exactly like my fingerprint. The edges of the indentation were dark and wet, and I swear I could see tiny fibers, almost like roots, spreading outward from where I'd touched. That's when I noticed my hands. 3 small, circular marks on my palm, where I'd handled the detached barnacle earlier in the week. They looked like tiny burn scars, but they weren't painful. They were warm, and they pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I scrubbed my hands raw in the kitchen sink, but the marks remained. Under a magnifying glass, they looked almost like tiny barnacle shells embedded in my skin. The thought made me so nauseous I had to sit down on my bathroom floor with my head between my knees. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, knocked on my door around noon. She was carrying a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies, the kind gesture she'd been doing for the 3 years I'd lived here. "Marcus, honey, I haven't seen you leave for work all week. Are you feeling all right?" I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain latched. Mrs. Peterson was 74, with silver hair and the kind of genuine concern that made you remember there were still good people in the world. "Just a stomach bug, Mrs. Peterson. I don't want to get you sick." She peered past me toward my driveway and her expression changed. "Good heavens! What happened to your car? It looks like it's covered in... Are those mushrooms?" "Something like that. I'm dealing with it." "Well, you should call your insurance company. That looks like it could be mold damage from sitting in moisture. My late husband Harold had something similar happen to his Buick after that flood in '98. After she left, I watched from my window as she walked back to her house. She kept glancing back at my car, shaking her head. I wondered how I'd explain it when the barnacles, or whatever they were, started spreading to other properties. That thought sent a chill down my spine. I grabbed my binoculars, the ones I used for the occasional bird watching, and did a systematic survey of my neighborhood from my second-floor bedroom window. At first, everything looked normal. The Johnsons' immaculate lawn, the Martinez family's minivan in their driveway, old Mr. Kowalski watering his tomato plants like he did every evening. Then I saw something that made my hands tremble so badly I almost dropped the binoculars. A small cluster of the cone-shaped growths on the Johnsons' mailbox post. Maybe 6 or 7 of them, no bigger than dimes, but unmistakably the same organisms that were consuming my Honda. I adjusted the focus, praying I was wrong. But no, they were there, growing on painted metal 2 houses down from mine. My phone rang, startling me so badly I knocked over my water glass. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Amanda Rodriguez from the University of Iowa's Marine Biology Department. I understand you called earlier this week about some unusual specimens." My heart pounded. I'd left messages everywhere, but hadn't expected anyone to take me seriously. "Yes, that's right, I think they're barnacles growing on my car. I'm calling because we received some unusual samples from the Iowa River yesterday. A fisherman brought in what he described as ocean creatures growing on his boat dock. The description matches what you told my colleague." The world seemed to spin. Ocean creatures? In the Iowa River? That's what we thought too. "Mr. Chen, I'm driving up to Cedar Rapids first thing tomorrow morning. Would you be available to show me these specimens?" After we hung up, I sat in my dark kitchen, staring out at my car in the driveway. The street lamp illuminated the clusters of false barnacles, and in the shifting light they almost seemed to be moving. My cell phone buzzed. A text from my sister Linda in Denver. "Saw the weirdest thing today, some kind of sea stuff growing on a car in the King Soopers parking lot. Made me think of your old marine biology phase. LOL. Miss you." She'd attached a photo. My blood turned to ice water. The image showed a silver Ford Focus covered in exactly the same cone-shaped growths that were devouring my Honda. Same size, same clustering pattern, same organic staining of the metal beneath. I called her immediately. "Linda, where exactly did you see that car?" "Hey, Marcus, at the grocery store on South Broadway." "Why? You sound weird." "Listen to me carefully. Don't go near that car. Don't touch it. And if you see anything similar, call me right away." "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's going on?" How could I explain that something impossible was spreading across the country? How could I tell her that whatever was consuming my car in Iowa had somehow reached Colorado? Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? After Linda hung up, I sat in my living room with my laptop, frantically searching social media for any mentions of unusual growths on vehicles. What I found made my stomach drop. A Facebook post from Omaha. Anyone know what these crusty things are on my truck? A Reddit thread from Kansas City. Weird barnacle-looking stuff appeared overnight on my car. Not near any water. WTF? A Twitter photo from Des Moines. Insurance company says this isn't covered. Anyone seen anything like this before? All of them showed the same organisms. All of them were hundreds of miles from any ocean. I made a list of every location I could find online. Cedar Rapids, Omaha, Kansas City, Des Moines, Denver, Oklahoma City, St. Louis. When I plotted them on a map, a pattern emerged that made my hands shake. They were all along major interstate highways, all within a few miles of truck stops or rest areas where travelers might park overnight. I thought about my own travels over the past month, the gas stations I'd stopped at, the parking lots where I'd left my car while running errands. How many surfaces had my contaminated Honda touched? How many parking spaces had I occupied while these things were spreading their microscopic spawn? My phone rang again. Dr. Rodriguez. "Mr. Chen, I've been in contact with colleagues at other universities. We're seeing reports of similar organisms from multiple states. This is much bigger than we initially thought." "How much bigger?" "At least 7 states so far, possibly more." "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you something important. Have you traveled outside of Iowa recently? Specifically, have you been to any government facilities or research installations?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. Biogen Solutions, about 3 weeks ago, but that was just a routine IT installation. The silence on her end lasted too long. "Dr. Rodriguez? Mr. Chen, I'm going to give you a phone number. You need to call it right now. Ask for Agent Sarah Volkov. Tell her exactly what you just told me." I'd been avoiding taking my car anywhere public, but by Saturday morning, I couldn't stand the isolation anymore. I needed answers, and Jerry's auto body on the east side of town was the closest thing to an expert opinion I could get. The drive there was surreal. Other drivers kept staring at my Honda, some even pulling out their phones to take pictures at red lights. I caught glimpses of myself in storefront windows. A guy driving what looked like a science experiment gone wrong. Jerry took one look and backed away from my Honda like it was radioactive. "What the hell did you drive through, Marcus?" he asked, pulling off his work gloves. "I've never seen anything like this. These things, are they alive?" "I think so." "Well, I can't help you. This isn't body work. This is like some kind of biology experiment gone wrong. You need to call the EPA or something." But as I was leaving Jerry's shop, something caught my eye in his employee parking lot. A beat-up Chevy Silverado with Wisconsin plates had 3 small growths near its rear wheel well. Tiny ones, easily missed unless you were looking for them. "Jerry," I called out, pointing to the truck. "Whose vehicle is that?" His face went pale when he saw what I was pointing at. That's Danny's truck. He drove down from Madison yesterday to help with a big repair job." Madison, Wisconsin? Yeah, why? I didn't answer. I was too busy calculating distances, travel times, contamination vectors. If these organisms could hitchhike on vehicles traveling interstate routes, by the time I got home, I had 17 missed calls from unknown numbers and 43 unread emails. Word was spreading on social media faster than I could track. Someone had posted a video of my car from Jerry's parking lot, and it was already being shared across automotive forums and conspiracy theory websites. The comments ranged from skeptical to terrified. Obviously fake, good CGI though. I've seen similar stuff in Topeka. This is real. Government bioweapon testing, mark my words. Everyone in that area needs to evacuate now. The EPA was surprisingly responsive when I mentioned potential environmental contamination. Agent Sarah Volkoff arrived at my house Saturday morning in a white SUV with government plates and equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. She spent 3 hours taking samples, measurements, and photographs. Her expression grew more concerned as the morning wore on. "Mr. Chen," she said finally, sealing the last sample in a biohazard container, "I need you to avoid contact with your vehicle until we get lab results back. Don't touch it, don't drive it, and definitely don't try to remove any more specimens. What do you think they are?" She glanced at my car, then back at me. "Honestly, I have no idea. But they're not behaving like any barnacle species in our database. The growth rate alone is unprecedented, and the fact that they're surviving in a freshwater environment," she shook her head. "We'll have preliminary results by Monday." That night, I barely slept. Every few hours, I'd get up and check on the car from my bedroom window. The barnacles seemed more active in the darkness, and I swear the clicking sounds were getting louder. Around 4 a.m., I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The barnacles weren't just on my car anymore. There were 3 small ones on the concrete of my driveway about 2 feet from my rear tire. They were tiny, no bigger than my thumbnail, but they were definitely there, definitely alive, and definitely growing on bare concrete. I grabbed my phone and called Agent Volkoff's emergency number. "They're spreading," I whispered into the phone, trying not to wake my neighbors. "They're not just on the car anymore." Her voice was instantly alert despite the early hour. "How far?" "A few feet so far, but Agent Volkoff, what if they don't stop? What if they keep spreading?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long. "We're expediting the lab work," she said finally. "Don't leave your house until I call you back." Agent Volkoff called at 2:47 p.m. on Sunday. "We need to talk. I'm coming over with a team." 20 minutes later, 3 government SUVs pulled into my driveway. Agents in hazmat suits began setting up a perimeter around my car, while Volkoff approached my front door in full protective gear. "The lab results came back," she said through her face mask. "These aren't barnacles, Mr. Chen. They're not any known terrestrial or marine species." My legs felt weak. "What are they?" "Something new. The genetic analysis shows characteristics we've never seen before, almost like they're designed rather than evolved." She looked past me toward my car. "Mr. Chen, have you been anywhere unusual in the past few weeks? Any construction sites, industrial areas, places that might have been exposed to experimental chemicals?" I thought back through my routine. Work, home, grocery store, gas station. Wait. I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, I had to drive out to that new tech campus outside town. We were installing computer systems for some kind of research facility. Volkoff's body language shifted. "Which facility?" "Biogen Solutions. They do some kind of advanced materials research. Something about bioengineering applications for extreme environments." She was already on her radio, speaking in codes I didn't understand. When she finished, she turned back to me with an expression I couldn't read through the hazmat suit. Mr. Chen, Biogen Solutions, was working on a classified military contract. They were developing organisms that could survive in space, specifically life forms that could establish colonies on other planets by adapting to any environment they encountered. The world seemed to tilt sideways. You're saying these things are alien? No, they're human-made. Bioengineered organisms designed to be the ultimate colonizers. They can adapt to any environment, reproduce rapidly, and transform local materials into something they can use for shelter and food. She gestured toward my car. Your car isn't just covered in these things. It's being converted into something they can use. But how did they get on my car? That's what we're trying to figure out. Biogen reported a containment breach 3 weeks ago, right around the time you were there installing systems. These organisms were designed to be transported dormant and then activated by specific environmental triggers. I stared at my Honda, now barely recognizable under its coating of false barnacles and spreading organic growth. The metal was turning soft and spongy, the glass was becoming cloudy, and the entire structure seemed to be digesting. What happens now? I asked. We contain the spread and study how to neutralize them. She paused. Mr. Chen, you should know that early models of these organisms were designed with a failsafe. They're supposed to go dormant after 30 days if they don't receive a specific chemical signal. Supposed to? The problem is, these organisms are designed to adapt. If they've survived this long in an environment they weren't created for, they might have evolved past their original programming. As if responding to her words, a new sound emerged from my driveway. The clicking had become a rhythmic pulsing, and the barnacle-like creatures were opening and closing in unison. The growth on my car seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. "Agent Volkov," one of her team members called out. "We're reading elevated activity levels. The organisms appear to be entering a new phase." She grabbed my arm. "We need to get you out of here. Now." As we hurried toward her SUV, I looked back at my house, my normal, suburban house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The creatures had spread another 6 feet across my driveway, and I could see a new growth starting on the base of my mailbox. "Where are we going?" I asked as we drove away. "Somewhere safe while we figure out how to stop this." She glanced in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Chen, I need you to think carefully about everywhere you've been since visiting Biogen. Every gas station, every parking lot, every place you might have left traces of these organisms." My stomach dropped. "I've been driving all over town for 3 weeks. I know." We drove in silence for several minutes before she spoke again. "The good news is that we caught this early. These organisms need a specific host material to really establish themselves. That's why they've been focused on your car. What's the bad news?" She was quiet for so long that I thought she hadn't heard me. Finally, she said, "The bad news is that your car isn't the only place we're finding them anymore." That was 18 months ago. I'm writing this from a secure facility outside Denver, Colorado, where I've been living since the Cedar Rapids incident. The government calls it a voluntary relocation program, but the armed guards and biometric scanners suggest otherwise. My case file number is CR4471, and I'm one of 37 documented patient zero individuals across the continental United States. We're the ones who had direct contact with what they now officially call adaptive synthetic organisms before the containment protocols were established. Agent Volkov still visits me twice a month. She's older now, grayer, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a war most people don't know is happening. The official story changed multiple times over the first year. First, it was environmental contamination from industrial runoff. Then, it became an invasive species accidentally introduced through shipping containers. The current public explanation involves biofilm bacteria that can be easily treated with specialized cleaning agents. All lies. The truth is that Biogen Solutions was developing terraforming organisms for a joint NASA Defense Department project called New Eden Protocol. The idea was elegant in its simplicity. Create life forms that could transform any environment into something habitable for human colonization. The ASOs were designed to be the perfect colonizers. They could adapt to any climate, consume and convert any material into usable resources, and reproduce at exponential rates when activated by specific chemical triggers. The containment breach wasn't an accident. It was sabotage. Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of Biogen's lead researchers, had discovered that the military intended to deploy ASOs as biological weapons rather than colonization tools. She tried to expose the project publicly, but instead of going to the media, she chose a more direct approach. She released modified versions of the organisms into the facility's ventilation system, banking on their adaptive nature to create an environmental disaster too large to cover up. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly they would spread, or how effectively the government could contain information in the age of social media. The Cedar Rapids incident was just the beginning. Within 6 months, ASO outbreaks had been reported in 43 states and 7 countries. The organisms adapted to every environment they encountered. Arctic tundra in Alaska, desert highways in Nevada, urban subway systems in New York. But they all maintained certain characteristics. They preferred metal surfaces, especially vehicles. They spread along transportation networks, and they showed an unusual affinity for electronic systems. Agent Volkov explained it during one of our sessions last month. They're not just consuming materials, she said, reviewing my latest test results. They're learning from them. Every car they infest, every computer system they come into contact with, they're incorporating that information into their genetic structure. What kind of information? GPS coordinates, travel patterns, communication networks. We think they're building a map. A map of what? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Colorado mountains. Everything. Every major city, every highway system, every power grid connection. They're preparing for something we don't understand yet. My latest medical exam showed that the marks on my hands have spread up my arms in intricate web-like patterns. They don't hurt. If anything, they feel warm and oddly comforting. But under ultraviolet light, they glow with the same phosphorescent quality as the ASOs. Dr. Kimura, the facility's lead physician, says I'm developing what they call symbiotic integration. Essentially, my body is adapting to coexist with ASO genetic material. You're not becoming one of them, she assured me during my last appointment. But you're not entirely human anymore either. The other patient zeros and I have started meeting informally in the rec room after dinner. Sarah from Portland can sense ASO activity within a 50-mile radius. David from Miami claims he can communicate with them telepathically, though the doctors think that's psychological trauma. Me, I dream in coordinates now. Every night, I see patterns spreading across maps of North America, glowing dots connected by flowing lines, like a circulatory system made of light. The network is growing, expanding, becoming more complex each time I close my eyes. And sometimes, in those dreams, I understand what they're building. It's not a map, it's a nervous system. Last week, during a routine interview session, Agent Volkov asked me a question that made my blood freeze. Marcus, in your dreams, do you ever see other planets? The answer was yes, but I lied. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share, even with people trying to help you. Because the truth is, the ASOs weren't designed for Earth colonization at all. They were designed to prepare worlds for something else. Something that's been watching our planet for a very long time, waiting for the right conditions to arrive. The barnacles on my car were never the real threat. They were just the welcoming committee. So here's my question for you, listening to this in the comfort of your warm bed. When was the last time you really looked at your car? I mean, really looked. At every surface, every crevice, every place where something small and patient might choose to hide. Because if there's one thing I learned from my experience, it's this. We're not alone on this planet anymore. We've made sure of that. And somewhere out there, in parking lots and driveways across the Midwest, something is waiting to grow. Sweet dreams. Story number 2. Listen, I need to tell you something. Something that happened in my kitchen last Tuesday night. And before you click away thinking this is just another weird internet story, wait, because what I'm about to share might already be happening in your freezer right now. You just haven't noticed yet. Check your ice tray when you're done reading. I dare you. Actually, maybe don't. Maybe it's better if you don't know. But first, let me tell you about the email I found in my drafts folder this morning. An email I never wrote. An email addressed to someone called the Coordinator, with GPS coordinates to every house on my street. The subject line simply read, "Harvest complete, awaiting final instructions." I never sent it, but according to the timestamp, it went out at exactly 3:17 a.m. The same time I first saw the spheres glow. Our story begins now. The first time I noticed them, I was making myself a bourbon on the rocks after another 12-hour shift at the Cleveland Medical Center. Just a Tuesday night. Nothing special. The ice cube clinked into my glass and I almost dropped the whole thing. Perfect sphere. Not kind of round. Not mostly spherical. A flawless, mathematical sphere. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds before laughing at myself. "Get it together, Marcus," I muttered. "You're seeing things." But when I went back to the freezer and dumped out the entire tray, 7 more perfect spheres rolled across my counter. The rest were normal cubes, jagged, cloudy, regular ice. But these 8, I picked one up. It was heavier than it should have been, dense. And when I held it up to the kitchen light, I swear I saw something move inside, just for a second, like smoke trapped in glass. Here's what I didn't tell you before. What I couldn't bring myself to admit, even to myself. When I held that first sphere, I felt it. A pulse, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of ice and impossibility. And for just a moment, I swear I heard my grandmother's voice. She'd been dead for 15 years, but there she was, whispering my childhood nickname, Little Doctor. The name she used when she'd bandage my scraped knees and tell me I'd save lives someday. The sphere grew cold enough to burn, and I dropped it. When it hit the floor, it didn't shatter. It rang, like a bell. A perfect, crystalline note that seemed to hang in the air long after the sphere stopped moving. That's when things started getting wrong. The first text came from my neighbor Janet around 11 p.m. She lived 3 doors down in our little suburban development off Mayfield Road. "Marcus, weird question. Are your ice cubes acting strange?" My hands were already shaking as I typed back. "Define strange." "Perfect balls, like marbles. Tom thinks I'm crazy, but I know what I saw." I set my phone down, walked to my sliding glass door, and looked out at the other houses on Sycamore Court. Kitchen lights were on in almost every home. On a Tuesday night, at 11 p.m. That should have been my first real warning. But here's what made my blood run cold. I could see into Mrs. Chen's kitchen window 2 houses over. She was standing at her counter, holding something up to the light. Something round, something that pulsed with that same sick blue glow I'd seen in my own sphere. And she was smiling, not a normal smile, the kind of smile you see on people in old photographs. Frozen, unnatural, like someone had carved it into her face with a blade. I went back to examining the spheres. Under my desk lamp, they were even more unsettling. The surface wasn't just smooth, it was impossibly smooth. No tool marks, no freeze lines, no bubbles. And the longer I stared, the more I noticed this shimmer. Like heat waves, but cold. My phone buzzed again. Janet. Tom just threw ours away. Said I was being paranoid, but Marcus, they came back. What do you mean they came back? In the freezer. Same tray. Same spots. Like we never touched them. Before I could respond, another text appeared. From a number I didn't recognize. Don't trust the ice. Don't trust your neighbors. Don't trust yourself. The convergence has begun. A friend. I looked at my counter where I'd left the 8 spheres. They were gone. Every single one. The freezer door was closed. I know it was closed because I'm obsessive about that. Electricity bills, you know. But when I opened it, 8 perfect spheres. Same positions in the tray. But now there was something else. A 9th sphere, larger than the others, sitting in the center like some kind of queen piece in a chess game I didn't understand. That's when I did what any rational person would do. I grabbed a hammer from my garage. The first sphere wouldn't break. I brought that hammer down hard enough to crack concrete and it just bounced. The ice didn't even chip. The second, third, fourth, nothing. They'd skitter across my garage floor like pinballs, completely intact. By the 5th one, I noticed something else. They were getting colder. Not normal ice cold. The kind of cold that burns. I had to use kitchen tongs to pick them up. But the 9th sphere, the large one, I couldn't even touch it with the tongs. The metal stuck to its surface like my tongue to a flagpole in winter. When I finally yanked the tongs free, they left behind perfect impressions in the sphere's surface. Impressions that slowly filled themselves in, like the sphere was healing. Midnight came and went. I was in full research mode, laptop open, searching everything I could about anomalous ice formation. Nothing. Forums, scientific papers, even conspiracy sites. Nobody talking about perfect ice spheres. Then I found one thread, posted 3 hours earlier on some obscure message board. The username was just numbers, 446. My zip code. They're listening through the ice. Don't let them complete the circuit. That was it. No replies, no explanation, account deleted. But there was something else. A timestamp showing the post had been edited multiple times. Each edit adding a single letter. When I put them together, they spelled out Sycamore Court. My street name. I wish I'd paid more attention to that warning. By 2 a.m., I'd convinced myself I was having some kind of stress-induced breakdown. 12 years of emergency medicine. It takes a toll. I decided to sleep it off, deal with it in the morning like a rational person. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. This humming. Low frequency, almost below perception. Coming from the kitchen. I tried to ignore it, covered my head with a pillow, but the sound got into my bones somehow. Vibrating, pulling, at 3:17 a.m., I know the exact time because I checked my phone. I gave up and went back to the kitchen. All the ice in the tray was spherical now. Every single cube, and they were glowing. Faintly. This sick, pale blue light that made my kitchen look like an aquarium. I stood there in my boxers and t-shirt, watching these impossible objects pulse in rhythm with that infernal humming. But here's what I couldn't bring myself to tell you before. The spheres weren't just glowing. They were projecting. Images. Memories. I saw my childhood bedroom, the nightlight my mother left on because I was afraid of the dark. But in this projection, the darkness moved. It had weight. It had hunger. I saw the first patient I lost. Mrs. Rodriguez, 67, cardiac arrest. But in the sphere's memory, she didn't die on my table. She opened her eyes at the moment her heart stopped and whispered, "The ice remembers everything." I saw myself as an old man, sitting in a rocking chair I didn't recognize, in a house I'd never seen, surrounded by grandchildren I'd never had. all of them staring at me with eyes made of ice. That's when I saw Janet's husband, Tom, through my kitchen window, standing in his backyard, still as a statue, facing his house, just standing there in his pajamas. But he wasn't alone. Mrs. Chen was in her yard too, and old Mr. Peterson from the corner house, the Washingtons from across the street, all of them standing, all of them still, all of them facing their homes like compass needles pointing north. I texted Janet, no response. The spheres pulsed brighter. I decided to go outside, check on Tom. The moment I stepped onto my patio, the cold hit me like a physical thing. October in Cleveland gets chilly, sure, but this was different. This was the kind of cold that comes from somewhere else, somewhere that shouldn't exist. "Tom?" I called out. "You okay, buddy?" He turned his head, just his head. Body stayed perfectly still. And his eyes, God, his eyes were frozen. Actually frozen. Ice crystals spreading from the corners like some kind of infection. He opened his mouth, probably to scream, but all that came out was this crackling sound, like stepping on fresh snow. But before he shattered, he spoke. One word, clear as daylight. Finally. Then he exploded into 1,000 pieces of frozen meat and bone. The pieces hit the ground with these tiny tinkling sounds like wind chimes, but the fragments, they didn't stay still. They slithered across the grass like insects, gathering in geometric patterns. Circles within circles within circles. I ran, not proud of it, but I ran straight back into my house and slammed the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the deadbolt. Through the window, I could see the spot where Tom had been. The fragments were gone, but something remained. Frost on the grass in impossible patterns. Mathematical equations written in ice. The humming in my kitchen got louder. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the screen was covered in ice, spreading from the inside out. But before it died completely, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. My call log showed dozens of outgoing calls, all to numbers I didn't recognize, all lasting exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds, all placed while I was asleep. The last entry showed I'd called my own number. At 3:17 a.m., the call was still active. I put the frozen phone to my ear and heard my own voice. "The circuit is almost complete. Do not resist." Power went out next, not just my house, the whole street. I watched through my window as every light on Sycamore Court blinked out in sequence, house by house, like something was moving through the power lines. Hunting. The only light came from the kitchens. That sick blue glow, getting brighter. I had to get out, had to warn someone. But when I tried to start my car, ice in the engine. When I tried to use my laptop, frozen solid. Even my damn flashlight wouldn't work. The batteries had burst from the cold. That's when I heard Janet scream. Not a normal scream. This was wrong. It started human, but ended somewhere else. Ended with that same crackling sound Tom made. Then silence. The spheres in my freezer were singing now, actually singing. No words, just these harmonics that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I could feel them pulling at something inside me, something warm and vital, but I could also hear something else. Voices in the melody, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. All the people who had been taken before. All the people who had found perfect spheres in their ice trays and thought they were alone. They were trying to warn me. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the entire ice tray and threw it in the oven, cranked it to 500 degrees. The moment that oven door closed, every window in my house exploded inward. The cold rushed in like a living thing. I could see it, actually see it, flowing across my floors like fog but faster. Searching. When it touched my coffee table, the wood split with frost patterns that looked like neural networks. When it reached my houseplants, they turned to crystal sculptures of themselves, perfect down to the last vein in every leaf. I backed into the corner of my living room, watching this impossible cold consume everything. The oven was screaming now, metal warping from whatever was happening inside. The door glowed red hot, then white hot. I could smell ozone and something else, something like copper pennies and spoiled milk. Then the voices started. They came from everywhere. The walls, the frozen television, the ice-covered ceiling. Overlapping whispers in a language that hurt to hear, but underneath the alien sounds I could pick out familiar voices. Tom, Janet, other neighbors I'd barely spoken to. But there were older voices too, dozens of them, hundreds, all the previous harvests from previous streets in previous cities. I heard accents from across the world, languages I couldn't identify, all of them saying the same thing in their native tongues. Let us in, let us in, let us in. The oven door burst open. Instead of heat, more cold poured out. And with it, the spheres. But they weren't ice anymore. They were something else. Something that moved like liquid mercury but felt like static electricity in the air. They circled me, slowly, like predators, like they were savoring the moment. That's when I saw what was really happening. Through my broken windows, I could see into every house on Sycamore Court. Every kitchen was filled with that blue glow. Every freezer was open. Every neighbor stood motionless in their yards, ice spreading from their feet like roots. But they weren't just standing there. They were connected. Thin streams of ice stretched between them, creating a network, a circuit, and I was the final node. That's when I remembered something, a dumb factoid from a documentary I'd watched years ago, about how certain frequencies can shatter glass. Resonance. Everything has a resonance. I started humming, badly, off-key, but I matched their frequency and then shifted it, just slightly. One sphere wobbled. The voices in the ice screamed. Not just the neighbors, all of them, every soul that had been harvested, every person who had found perfect spheres in their freezer and failed to escape the circuit. But some of those voices, some of them were trying to help me. My grandmother's voice rose above the others. Sing, little doctor. Sing them back to sleep. I hummed louder, adjusted the pitch. Another sphere started vibrating. They didn't like that. The whispers turned to shrieks. The cold pressed in harder. I could feel frost forming on my skin, in my lungs, but I kept humming, kept shifting the frequency. The first sphere cracked. Not like ice, like reality. A hairline fracture that leaked darkness so complete it hurt to look at. That's when I saw what was really inside them. Not eyes. Universes. Entire cosmologies of suffering. Billions of frozen worlds where the ice had won, where the circuit had completed, where every living thing stood motionless in eternal winter, fuel for something so vast and hungry it defied comprehension. The sphere shattered completely, and something wet and wrong splattered across my floor. It moved for a few seconds, trying to reform, then dissolved into vapor that smelled like ozone and fear. But as it died, I heard it whisper, "Thank you." The other spheres backed off, regrouping, recalculating. I pressed my advantage, hummed harder, threw in harmonics I didn't know I could make. My throat was raw, bloody, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. One by one, the spheres cracked, shattered, died, each one screaming with 1,000 stolen voices. I recognized some of them. Tom laughing at a barbecue last summer, Janet complaining about her rose bushes, the kid from 2 houses down practicing violin. All of them trapped, all of them fuel for something. But as each sphere died, I felt something else. Relief. Not just from me, but from the voices inside. They were being freed. sent to whatever comes after this existence instead of being trapped forever in crystalline prisons. When the last sphere broke, the cold retreated like a tide going out. The ice on my walls sublimated instantly, leaving everything damp and wrong-smelling. The power flickered back on. My phone buzzed with 2 days' worth of messages I'd never received. But something had changed. The house felt different. Lighter, somehow. As if a terrible weight had been lifted. I sat on my wet floor until sunrise, afraid to move, afraid to check on my neighbors, afraid to look in my freezer. When I finally did look outside, Sycamore Court seemed normal. Cars in driveways, newspapers on porches. Tom's truck parked exactly where it always was, but the frost patterns remained. Geometric. Perfect. And in the center of each lawn, a small circle of Part 4. The aftermath. I called in sick to work. First time in 3 years. Spent the morning walking the neighborhood, trying to convince myself it had been a dream. Some kind of hallucination. Tom answered his door on the third knock, looked exactly like himself, smiled, complained about the Guardians' playoff chances, everything normal except his eyes. For just a second, when the sun hit them, I saw ice crystals, deep inside, waiting. But there was something else, something new. When he blinked, the crystals flickered. Unstable, like they were fighting something. "Crazy dreams last night," he said. "You ever have those dreams where you're freezing, can't move, but then you hear singing and suddenly you can move again?" I stared at him. "Singing? Yeah, like someone was trying to wake me up. Weird, right?" I mumbled something and left, my mind racing. Janet was in her garden, pruning roses that hadn't grown right all summer. She waved with gardening shears that caught the light strange. "Marcus, feeling better? You looked terrible yesterday." "Yesterday?" I asked. "When you knocked on my door at 3 a.m., rambling about ice cubes?" She laughed, but it sounded almost normal now. Human. "I told you to cut back on the bourbon, but you know what? After you left, I had the strangest dreams. I dreamed I was trapped in ice, and then I heard music. Beautiful music. And suddenly I could breathe again." I didn't remember knocking on her door. I didn't remember anything except the ice. Back home, I avoided the kitchen for hours, but eventually, thirst won. I opened the freezer like I was defusing a bomb. Normal ice. Cloudy. Imperfect. Regular cubes in a regular tray. Relief flooded through me until I noticed the note, stuck to the ice tray with frost. My handwriting, but I didn't remember writing it. "They're not gone, they're waiting. When the temperature drops below absolute zero, the circuit completes. Don't let them take you too." The song worked this time. Will it work again? MPS. Check the basement. Below absolute zero. Impossible. That's less than impossible. That's a violation of physics, of reality. But I went to the basement anyway. In the corner behind the water heater, I found a box I'd never seen before. Inside, hundreds of photographs, all of different neighborhoods, all showing the same frost patterns on lawns, all labeled with dates going back decades. At the bottom of the box was a journal, not mine. The handwriting belonged to someone else, someone named Sarah Chen. Entry 1. The ice came to Maple Street last winter. Only I escaped, only I learned the song. Moving to Sycamore Court tomorrow. Maybe I can protect the next batch. Entry 47. The circuit is trying to complete again. The spheres are appearing. I've been leaving warnings where I can. Anonymous texts. Forum posts. I have to be careful. They're watching. Entry 83. Found the perfect house. 3 doors down from the strongest node. If I can't stop it, maybe I can teach someone else the song. Maybe this time, more people will survive. Entry 97. The young man in the corner house is a doctor. Doctors save people. Maybe he can save all of them. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who'd been standing in her yard with the rest of them. But she wasn't taken. She was trying to save us. That was a week ago. The ice cubes are still normal. Mostly. Sometimes I catch one starting to round out, smoothing at the edges. I throw those away immediately. Run hot water over them until they're completely gone, but more keep appearing. I've stopped sleeping, started keeping the heat at 80 degrees. Costs a fortune, but it's worth it. The humming only comes when it's cold now, when the temperature drops. I've tried to leave, packed my car twice, but every time I reach the city limits my engine freezes, even in broad daylight, even with the heater blasting. Ice forms on the inside of the windshield, spelling out words in languages that shouldn't exist. The circuit must complete. You cannot escape the convergence. Soon, always soon. But I'm not fighting alone anymore. Tom and Janet and the others. They remember fragments now. During the day, they seem normal. But they've started leaving me notes, coordinates, addresses, other neighborhoods where the ice has appeared. Mrs. Chen visits every evening. She brings tea and tells me stories about the other places she's lived. The other times she's fought this thing. The other people she's taught to sing. It's not evil, she explains. It's just hungry. It feeds on stillness, on perfection, on the moments between heartbeats when everything stops. How many times have you fought it? 17 cities, 43 streets, thousands of people. She sips her tea with hands that shake slightly. But we're learning. Each time, more people escape. Each time, the song gets stronger. She shows me a map, red dots across the country, across the world, each one representing a place where the ice has tried to establish a circuit. Some dots have lines through them, victories, places where the song worked. Others remain unmarked, feeding grounds where the ice still holds dominion. Why ice? I ask. She's quiet for a long time. Ice preserves things, keeps them exactly as they were. The entity, it's afraid of change, of entropy, of the beautiful chaos of living things, so it tries to make everything perfect, still, forever. And the spheres? Storage containers, prison cells. Every soul it takes becomes part of the network, part of its power. She touches my hand with fingers that are always slightly cold. But you did something different. You didn't just break them, you freed them, you gave them peace. That night, I dream of voices, thousands of them, all singing the same wordless song, and when I wake, I understand. The humming, the frequency that shatters the spheres. It's not just random noise, it's music, the music of imperfection, of life refusing to be still, and I'm not the only one who knows it now. Epilogue. The Singers. If you're reading this, if you made it this far, check your ice. I'm serious, right now. Pause this, go check. Because if even one cube is starting to round out, if even one is heavier than it should be, if you hold it to the light and see something moving inside, don't panic. You're not alone. Find the frequency. Find the song. Let it come from your bones, your blood, your stubborn refusal to be perfect. And if you can't find it yourself, listen for us. We're out there now. Mrs. Chen and I and Tom and Janet and hundreds of others. We move from city to city, street to street. We leave warnings. We teach the song. We break the circuits before they can complete. Sometimes we arrive too late. Sometimes we find neighborhoods where everyone stands motionless in their yards, ice spreading from their feet like roots, their souls trapped in perfect spheres. But sometimes we arrive just in time. Sometimes we find someone like you, reading stories like this, checking their freezer with trembling hands. and we teach them to sing. The entity is patient. It's been doing this for millennia, feeding on civilizations across the galaxy. Ice ages aren't accidents, they're harvests. But we're patient too. And every time it tries to establish a new circuit, more of us are waiting. More voices join the song. It's afraid now. For the first time in eons, it's afraid. Because it turns out the one thing it can't preserve, can't make perfect, can't trap in crystalline prisons, is hope. Did you check your ice yet? You should. Tonight, when you close your eyes, listen for the humming. If you hear it, don't be afraid. Sing back, and remember, you're not alone in this. We're coming. We're already here. We're the song that breaks the silence. We're the chaos that shatters the perfect spheres. We're the singers of the melting song. Sweet dreams. And when you wake up, check your ice one more time. If it's normal, thank us in the comments. If it's not, well, we'll see you soon. If you found this story on your computer without remembering how it got there, if your ice has started forming perfect spheres, if you hear humming in the walls when the temperature drops, contact the singers. We monitor all social media for keywords. We're coming. Hold on. Learn the song, the network. Story number 3. The photograph should have been there. But it wasn't. Just an empty space on my mother's mantelpiece where my 5th grade school picture used to sit between my sister's graduation photo and Dad's military portrait. The dust outline was still visible, a perfect rectangle that proved something had been there for years. But when I asked Mom about it, she looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What photo, sweetie? I've never put your school pictures on the mantel." That was 3 days ago, and now I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom in Denver, staring at walls that feel wrong somehow. The Pokemon posters I remembered covering every inch of space? Gone. The glow-in-the-dark stars I'd carefully arranged into constellations on my ceiling never existed, according to everyone else. Even the pencil marks on my door frame where Mom used to measure my height. They're there, but they skip years, age 7, then straight to age 11. 4 years of my life just missing. But here's what really terrifies me. I can feel more memories slipping away even as I try to hold on to them, like trying to catch water with your bare hands. If this sounds impossible, stick around, because what I discovered about why this is happening will change everything you think you know about memory, childhood, and the terrifying possibility that some experiences are meant to be forgotten. The story begins now. I've always prided myself on having a good memory. In college at the University of Colorado, my friends used to joke that I was like a walking encyclopedia of random childhood stories. Remember that time we got lost in the Walmart and I hid in the clothing racks? Remember when I broke my arm falling off the monkey bars at Washington Elementary? Remember the summer I spent every day at Cherry Creek Pool, teaching myself to hold my breath underwater for 2 minutes? Except none of my friends remembered these stories anymore. It started small. Last month I was having dinner with my college roommate Sarah at that little Italian place on 16th Street Mall. We were reminiscing about our childhoods when I brought up the time I accidentally dyed my hair green, trying to bleach it with household cleaner in 4th grade. Sarah laughed, but not in recognition. "That's hilarious, but I think you're mixing up someone else's story with your own. You've always had brown hair. Never been much of a risk taker with hairstyles." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old photos to prove her wrong. But as I swiped through years of pictures, there it was. Brown hair in every single photo. Not a hint of the green disaster I remembered so vividly. I could still feel the shame of walking into Mrs. Patterson's classroom looking like a sea creature, the way kids pointed and whispered. But the evidence said it never happened. That night, I called my mom. "Remember when I dyed my hair green in elementary school?" Silence on the other end. The kind of pause that makes your stomach drop. "Honey, you never did anything like that. You were always such a well-behaved child. Never gave us any trouble with wild faces or anything. Well-behaved child. The words felt like ice water in my veins. I was anything but well-behaved. I was the kid who got detention for releasing crickets in the science lab. The one who convinced half my third-grade class to stage a protest against cafeteria lima beans. The kid who once climbed onto the school roof during recess just to see if I could. Or was I? The next few days became a blur of phone calls and frantic searching. I contacted old teachers, childhood friends, neighbors, anyone who might remember the real me, but everyone told the same story. I was quiet, studious, never caused problems. A model student who spent recess reading instead of getting into trouble. The more people I talked to, the more I realized something impossible was happening. Not only were my memories wrong, they were being actively erased from everyone else's minds too. That's when I found the first gap in the photo albums. Mom keeps everything. Every birthday party, every school event, every random Tuesday afternoon gets documented and carefully preserved in those old-fashioned photo albums with the sticky pages and clear plastic covers. But when I went through them looking for evidence of my real childhood, there were gaps. Pages where photos had clearly been removed, leaving behind only those little corner tabs that once held pictures in place. Mom, what happened to the photos that were here? She flipped through the pages, genuinely confused. I don't know what you mean. These albums have always looked like this. But I could see the evidence. The way the story jumped from my 7th birthday straight to my 12th. The missing pages between family Christmas mornings. The gaps that should have been filled with soccer games, school plays, camping trips to Rocky Mountain National Park. 5 years of my life were systematically disappearing. And somehow, I was the only one who noticed. I became obsessed with documenting everything I could remember before it disappeared completely. Late nights in my apartment on Capitol Hill, I'd sit at my laptop typing out every detail I could recall from ages 7 to 11. The way the morning sun would stream through my bedroom window at exactly 7:23 a.m. How my sheets always smelled like the lavender fabric softener Mom used. The sound of Dad's coffee grinder echoing through the house every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. But even as I wrote, I could feel the memories becoming fuzzy. Like trying to remember a dream after you've been awake for hours. The details would slip away even as I tried to capture them. I decided to visit my elementary school. Washington Elementary had been torn down years ago, replaced by a modern building with solar panels and those weird pod-shaped classrooms. But I drove to the location anyway, standing in the parking lot where my childhood playground used to be. That's when I met Mrs. Chen, the current principal. She'd been a teacher at the old school during my years there. "Excuse me," I approached her as she was getting into her car. "I'm trying to remember something from when I was a student here. Did you ever have a student named—" I gave her my full name. She stopped, keys halfway to the ignition, and turned to look at me with the strangest expression. "How do you know that name?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Because that's my name. I went to school here from 2003 to 2009. Mrs. Chen stepped out of her car, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You look familiar," she said slowly. "But that student, there was something wrong with that situation. Something we were told never to discuss." My heart started racing. "What do you mean, something wrong?" She glanced around the empty parking lot, then leaned closer. There were forms, official documents that came from somewhere. Downtown, I think. Instructions that we were to remove all records of certain students, delete files, destroy photos, never mention their names again. Your name was on that list. The world started spinning. That's impossible. Why would anyone do that? I don't know. But I remember now, you were involved in something during 4th grade. Something that made the administrators very nervous. There were men in suits who came to the school. They interviewed teachers, went through files, took boxes of records away. She paused, pressing her fingers to her temples like she was fighting a headache. This is the first time I've been able to remember any of this clearly. It's like there was a fog over those memories. But talking to you, seeing your face, it's coming back. I grabbed her arm, probably too tightly. What happened in 4th grade? What did I do? But even as I asked the question, I could see her eyes going distant again. The clarity was fading from her expression like someone adjusting the focus on a camera. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm confusing you with someone else. I'm sorry, I should go. She got back in her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in that parking lot with more questions than answers. But now I had a clue. Something had happened in 4th grade. Something important enough that official documents were created to erase it. That night, I called my sister Emma in California. Emma is 5 years older than me, and she was in high school during my elementary school years. If anyone would remember what really happened, it would be her. Em, I need to ask you something weird. Do you remember anything strange happening when I was in 4th grade? Like anything involving the school, or men in suits, or official documents? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Emma? Why are you asking about that? My pulse quickened. She remembered something. Because I think someone is erasing my childhood from everyone's memory. But you remember, don't you? What happened? I can't talk about this over the phone. Can you fly out here this weekend? Emma, just tell me. No, not over the phone. Promise me you'll come out here and I'll tell you everything. But we have to be careful who we trust. The call ended, leaving me staring at my phone in the darkness of my apartment. My own sister was scared to talk about my childhood over the phone. What could a 9-year-old have possibly done that was so serious it required this level of cover-up? But as I booked my flight to San Francisco, I realized something even more disturbing. I couldn't remember what I had done either. The memories of 4th grade weren't just fading. They were completely gone. Like someone had taken an eraser to that entire year of my life. And I was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they had good reason to make me forget. Emma lives in a small house in Oakland, the kind of place where every surface is covered with crystals and dream catchers and those little Tibetan prayer flags. She's always been into alternative spirituality, which is why I wasn't completely surprised when she made me leave my phone in a metal box by the front door. They can use those to track conversations, she explained, leading me to her kitchen table where she'd already laid out old photo albums and manila folders. I've been keeping these hidden for 15 years, waiting for the day you'd start remembering. The photos hit me like a physical punch. There I was at age 8, but different. My eyes looked older somehow, more aware. And I was always alone in the pictures. Even in group shots with other kids, there was this space around me, like no one wanted to get too close. Emma, what am I looking at? She sat down across from me, her hands shaking as she opened the first folder. You were special, little brother, but not in a good way, not in any way that anyone knew how to handle. She pulled out what looked like a medical report, though the letterhead was blacked out. I could see my name at the top, and below it a series of test results that made no sense to me. You started showing signs when you were 7. Mom and Dad thought you were just going through a phase at first. Imaginary friends, talking to yourself, knowing things you shouldn't know, but then it got stronger. What got stronger? You could access other people's memories. Not just access them. You could change them, edit them, make people forget things that really happened, or remember things that never did. The room started spinning. That was impossible. People don't just develop telepathic abilities. I know how it sounds, Emma continued. But I was there. I saw what you could do. Remember Mrs. Henderson from down the street? You made her forget that her husband died. For 3 months, she kept setting a place for him at dinner, waiting for him to come home from work. You thought you were being kind. Fragments of memory started surfacing. Not my own memories, but glimpses of things I shouldn't have known. Mrs. Henderson's husband collapsed in their garden while planting tomatoes. The way she screamed when she found him. The funeral with the wrong flowers because no one remembered he was allergic to lilies. I had made her forget because I couldn't stand seeing her cry. The school noticed when other kids started having problems. Memory gaps, confusion, nightmares about things that never happened. Your teacher, Mrs. Patterson, she realized you were somehow involved. She started keeping detailed notes, documenting everything. Emma pulled out a thick notebook filled with handwritten observations in careful teacher script. As I read, my blood turned cold. Subject appears to unconsciously influence classmates' recollections during stress. When embarrassed about test grade, classmates began insisting test was never given. When upset about playground conflict, involved parties could not recall what they were fighting about. Page after page of documentation. My 4th grade teacher had been running an unofficial psychological experiment on me, tracking every instance of my ability. What happened to Mrs. Patterson? She contacted some people, researchers, government types. They came to evaluate you, but by then you'd gotten scared. You went into full defensive mode and Emma's voice trailed off. And what? You erased yourself, not just from their memories, from everyone's. Teachers, classmates, even mom and dad. For almost a week, you were a ghost. You'd walk into rooms, and people would look right through you. You'd speak, and no one would hear you. The horror of it washed over me. A 9-year-old child so terrified of being studied like a lab rat that he made himself invisible to the entire world. How did I come back? You almost didn't. You were fading from reality itself. Emma reached across the table and grabbed my hands. I was the only one who remembered you, because I was out of state at college during the worst of it. When I came home for Christmas and everyone acted like I was an only child, I knew something was wrong. She pulled out one final document, this one with an official government seal that wasn't blacked out. I contacted the same researchers Mrs. Patterson had reached out to. They had a protocol for situations like yours, a way to suppress the ability permanently, but at a cost. You had to agree to let them erase the traumatic memories that triggered your power, which meant erasing most of your childhood. I stared at the consent form, signed in my own 9-year-old handwriting. A waiver allowing the government to perform selective memory modification to ensure I could live a normal life. But it's wearing off, Emma said quietly. The suppression was only meant to last until you were old enough to handle the truth. And now that you're remembering, your ability might be coming back too. As if summoned by her words, I suddenly felt it. A strange tingling in the back of my mind, like a door slowly creaking open. And with it came a terrible realization. Emma's memories of all this, they felt different somehow, sharper, more detailed than they should be after 15 years, because I was the one putting them there. Emma, when did you really find out about all this? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. My sister's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, recognition, then something that looked almost like relief. 3 days ago, she whispered. When you started remembering, I started remembering too. Everything I just told you. It all came flooding back at once, like someone was downloading files directly into my brain. The implications hit me like a freight train. If my memories were returning, and if that was triggering other people to remember, then my ability wasn't just coming back. It was already back, and it was stronger than ever. The phone calls you made, I said, pieces clicking into place. Mrs. Chen at the school, all those old friends and teachers. I wasn't just asking them to remember, I was making them remember. Emma nodded. And every time you try to recover more of your past, you're essentially performing mass hypnosis on everyone who was there. You're rewriting their reality to match your need for answers. I stood up from the table, pacing to the window. Outside, Oakland looked normal. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes, the mundane beauty of ordinary life. But I could feel it now, the way my thoughts were reaching out, touching other minds like fingers skimming the surface of water. "There's something else," Emma said behind me. "The reason they couldn't permanently erase your ability, it's because it's not just telepathy. You're not reading minds or implanting memories. You're actually changing the past." I turned back to her. "That's impossible." "Is it? Think about those photo albums. The missing pictures weren't removed by hand. They never existed in the first place. When you changed people's memories of events, you changed the events themselves. Reality reshapes itself around your will." The room felt like it was tilting. If that was true, then everything I thought I knew about my childhood, about the nature of memory and reality itself, was wrong. "But there are limits," Emma continued. "Physical evidence that's too far removed from you remains unchanged. That's why there are still gaps in the photo albums, still empty spaces where your school picture should be. Reality tries to maintain consistency, but it can't always keep up with the changes you make." I thought about Mrs. Chen, how confused she'd looked when I asked about my name, how she'd said there were official documents instructing the school to erase records of certain students. What if those documents were created retroactively, reality's way of explaining why I had been forgotten? "Emma, what if I never had this ability at all? What if I'm creating the entire story right now, making you remember things that never happened because I can't accept that my childhood was just ordinary?" She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Then you're more powerful than anyone imagined, because you're not just changing the past. You're creating it." A new memory surfaced, crystal clear and terrifying in its mundane detail. I was 9 years old, sitting in a sterile room with fluorescent lights and beige walls. A woman in a lab coat was asking me questions while a man in a suit took notes. They wanted to know how I did it, how I made people forget. But I couldn't explain it because I didn't understand it myself. I just wanted things to be different. And then they were. "They're coming back," I said, suddenly, the knowledge appearing in my mind like it had always been there. "The researchers. They monitor for signs of ability resurgence. The phone calls I made, the people I contacted. It sent up red flags in whatever system they used to track people like me." Emma's face went pale. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. Maybe hours, maybe days. But they'll want to suppress the ability again. And this time they might not be so gentle about it." I could feel my power growing stronger by the minute, like a muscle that had been dormant for years suddenly remembering how to flex. The temptation to use it was overwhelming. I could make Emma forget this conversation, make her remember a normal childhood for me instead. I could reach out and touch the minds of the researchers who were coming, make them forget I existed entirely. I could erase myself so completely that I'd never have existed at all. "Don't," Emma said, reading the expression on my face. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. The world needs people like you, even if it doesn't understand you. People like me are dangerous. I could accidentally rewrite history, change things that shouldn't be changed. Or you could help people heal from trauma, help them forget pain that's destroying their lives, help them remember joy they've lost." Outside, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 people in dark suits got out, checking devices that looked like tablets but moved too smoothly, displayed information too quickly to be normal technology. "They're here," I said. Emma grabbed my hand. You have a choice. You can let them take you, suppress your ability again, go back to living a normal life with a carefully edited past, or you can disappear. Use your power to erase yourself so completely that even they can't find you. Start over somewhere else, someone else. Live with the responsibility of what you can do. The researchers were walking up the front path now. I could feel their minds, focused and determined, but not cruel. They genuinely believed they were helping me, protecting the world from something too dangerous to exist freely. Maybe they were right. I closed my eyes and reached out with my ability, feeling the vast web of memories and possibilities spreading out around me like a spider's web made of thought and time. I could see the threads that connected me to everyone I'd ever met, every moment I'd ever changed, every reality I'd accidentally overwritten. And I realized I didn't want to be normal. I didn't want a carefully edited past or a safe, mundane future. I wanted to understand what I was, what I could do, and maybe learn to use it responsibly. The knock came at the front door. "Emma," I said, opening my eyes. "Do you trust me?" She nodded. "Then forget this conversation. Forget I was ever here. Remember only that you love your little brother wherever he might be." I reached out with my mind and gently, carefully, edited our afternoon together. Emma would remember making lunch, reading a book, taking a nap. Nothing unusual, nothing that would interest the researchers. As her memories shifted, I felt my own connection to this place, to this identity, beginning to fade. I was unwriting myself from Emma's life, from this house, from Oakland itself. The researchers would find nothing here, no trace of the person they were looking for. But I would still exist. Somewhere else, someone else. Free to figure out what I was meant to do with this impossible gift. The last thing I remember before disappearing completely is Emma's face, peaceful and content, with no memory of the brother who had just erased himself from her reality. And now I'm somewhere else. Someone else. Starting over with a new name, a new past, a new chance to learn control. But the question that haunts me, the one I can't answer even with my ability to rewrite reality itself, is this: was any of it real? Or am I just an ordinary person with an extraordinary delusion, so powerful I can make the world believe in my own fantasy? I suppose I'll never know for certain. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed in whatever city I've chosen to exist in today, I sometimes remember a childhood that might have been real, a family that might have loved me, a sister who might still be wondering where her little brother went. And I wonder, if I can change the past, could I change it back? Would I want to? The answer scares me more than anything else I've discovered about myself. Because the truth is, I like having this power. I like being able to fix things, to heal pain, to give people the memories they need, instead of the ones they're stuck with. And that might make me the most dangerous person who has ever existed. Or it might make me exactly what the world needs. I guess we'll find out together. If you've made it this far, I need you to help me figure something out. In your own life, are there childhood memories that feel wrong somehow? Moments that your family insists never happened? Photos that should exist but don't? Because if my story is true, if people like me really exist, then I'm probably not the only one whose past has been carefully edited. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of us too. Think about it. And if you start remembering things that don't make sense, things that other people insist never happened, find me. I'll be listening. The story you just heard might be fiction, or it might be the most important warning you'll ever receive. Drop a comment below if you've ever experienced missing memories or reality gaps. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories that blur the line between what's possible and what we're allowed to remember. and hit that notification bell. Because some stories choose their audience, and this one might have chosen you. Sweet dreams. Story number 4. They knew my name before I told them. Not the mushrooms, the people who found me. 3 hikers discovered me wandering the trails of Mount Baker National Forest at dawn, my clothes torn, my hands covered in dirt, and something else. Something that glowed faintly blue in the morning light. When they called out to me, they used my full name, Rebecca Ann Thornton. Middle name and all. I'd never seen them before in my life, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happened in those woods, and before you think this is just another campfire story, I have proof. Check the news reports from Whatcom County, Washington, dated October 15th, 2024. 4 people missing, 3 found, 1 still out there. All right, here we go. The story starts now. My best friend Sarah convinced me to go mushroom hunting. Not the magic kind, just regular foraging for chanterelles and oyster mushrooms. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip to her family's cabin near Mount Baker. Just me, Sarah, her boyfriend Marcus, and Marcus's roommate Tyler, who none of us really knew that well. It'll be like a double date, Sarah had said, wiggling her eyebrows at me over our Thursday night margaritas at Chili's. Tyler's cute, he works in tech. I wasn't interested in Tyler or his tech job, but I was interested in getting out of Seattle for a weekend. The October rain had been particularly depressing that year, and the idea of crisp mountain air and cozy cabin nights sounded perfect. We drove up Friday afternoon in Marcus's Subaru Outback, because of course he had a Subaru. The cabin sat about 40 minutes from the main road, tucked into a grove of Douglas firs so thick that cell service dropped to nothing about halfway there. Sarah had warned me about this. Digital detox, she'd chirped, tossing her iPhone into the glove compartment with theatrical flair. The cabin was exactly what you'd expect. Wood paneling, stone fireplace, that distinctive smell of pine and old memories. Sarah's grandparents had built it in the 70s, and it showed. Shag carpet in the bedrooms. Avocado green appliances in the kitchen. A collection of Reader's Digest condensed books that probably hadn't been touched since Reagan was president. We settled in quickly. Sarah and Marcus took the master bedroom. Tyler got the small room with twin beds. I claimed the pull-out couch in the living room, which suited me fine. I've always been a night owl, and I liked the idea of staying up late by the dying fire with a book. That first night was perfect. We grilled burgers on the ancient Weber outside, drank local IPAs, played Cards Against Humanity until we were all crying with laughter. Tyler turned out to be funnier than I expected, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. When he smiled, really smiled, one dimple appeared on his left cheek, not that I was paying attention. Around midnight, after the others had gone to bed, I sat alone by the fireplace with a dog-eared copy of The Stand I'd found on the bookshelf. The rain had started again, pattering against the windows in that rhythmic way that makes you drowsy. I was just about to call it a night when I heard it. A voice. Soft, coming from somewhere outside. Rebecca. I froze. The book slipped from my hands. Rebecca Ann. My middle name. Nobody here knew my middle name. Hell, I never used it. It wasn't on my driver's license, my social media, nothing. Only my mother called me Rebecca Ann, and only when I was in serious trouble. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering. The voice seemed to be coming from the forest behind the cabin. It wasn't calling exactly, more like breathing my name into existence. Rebecca Ann Thornton. My full name. Every hair on my arms stood up. I should have woken the others, should have locked the doors and hidden under the covers like a rational person. Instead, I found myself walking to the back door, pressing my face against the cold glass. The forest was dark. So dark it looked solid, like a wall of black paint. But there, about 50 feet from the cabin, was that a light? A faint blue glow, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The voice came again, and this time I was certain it was coming from that light. "Rebecca Ann Thornton, come see what grows." My hand was on the doorknob before I realized what I was doing. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to go wake up Tyler or Marcus or anyone. But my body moved on its own, turning the knob, opening the door to the cold October night. The air smelled different out here. Under the pine and rain was something else. Something sweet and rotten at the same time, like overripe fruit mixed with copper pennies. I took one step outside, then another. My bare feet sank into the wet grass. "That's it, come see what knows your name." The blue light pulsed brighter, and now I could see its source. Mushrooms. A perfect circle of them, each one glowing with that soft blue bioluminescence. They were beautiful, absolutely beautiful, like something from a fantasy movie, too perfect to be real. I walked closer, unable to stop myself. The mushrooms were small, delicate things with caps no bigger than quarters. But that glow, God, that glow was mesmerizing. It pulled at something deep in my chest, made my eyes water with its beauty. "We know you, Rebecca Ann. We've been waiting." The voice wasn't coming from one mushroom, but from all of them. A chorus of whispers that seemed to vibrate through the ground and up into my bones. I knelt at the edge of the circle, my hands reaching out. "Don't touch them!" The shout came from behind me. I spun around to see Tyler standing in the doorway, his face pale in the moonlight. He was wearing ridiculous flannel pajama pants and a Nirvana t-shirt, but his expression was dead serious. "Rebecca, get away from them. Now!" But it was too late. My fingers had already brushed against one of the glowing caps. The world exploded into blue light. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I stood in a vast space that defied description. Not a room, not outdoors, just an endless expanse of that same blue glow. The ground beneath my feet felt spongy, organic, like I was standing on something alive. And I wasn't alone. They stood in a circle around me, dozens of them. People, but not quite. Their shapes were human enough, but their edges seemed to blur and shift, as if they were made of smoke held together by willpower. And their faces, God, their faces were the worst part. Not because they were monstrous or deformed, because they were familiar. "Welcome, Rebecca Ann," they said in unison, their voices layering over each other like a corrupted audio file. "We've been waiting so long." I tried to speak, but my throat felt full of cotton. One of the figures stepped forward, and I gasped. It was my grandmother. Not as I'd last seen her, dying in a hospital bed, small and frail, but as she appeared in her wedding photos. Young, beautiful, her dark hair pinned up in victory rolls. "Grandma Ruth?" My voice came out as a whisper. She smiled, but it was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. "I'm what remembers her," the thing wearing my grandmother's face said. "What grows from what's left behind. We all are." The circle tightened. I saw other faces now. My high school English teacher who'd died in a car accident. My childhood neighbor who'd passed from cancer. A barista from my favorite coffee shop who'd simply stopped showing up one day and nobody knew why. All dead. All here. "The mushrooms remember," they said together. "Every person who passes through these woods leaves something behind. A whisper, an echo, a name. We grow from what remains." "This isn't real," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong. This was real, too real, the kind of real that makes you question everything else. "You're special, Rebecca Ann," not Grandma Ruth said, reaching out with fingers that seemed to phase in and out of existence. "Your family has deep roots here. Your blood calls to us." My family? I took a step back, but the circle moved with me. "What are you talking about?" "Your great-great-grandfather built a logging camp here, right where we grow. So many names were left in this soil, so many echoes. The Thornton blood runs deep. Memories surfaced. Vague family stories about ancestors in the logging industry. My mom mentioning something about family land near Mount Baker. Details I'd never paid attention to. We've been calling your family home for generations, the figures continued, but you're the first to answer, the first to touch us willingly. I didn't mean to. Intention doesn't matter, connection does, and now you're connected, part of the network, part of what grows and whispers and remembers. I felt it then, a presence in my mind, alien and invasive, like roots spreading through my thoughts, cataloging my memories, learning who I was down to the smallest detail, every embarrassing moment, every secret, every name I'd ever known. No! I tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. The blue light was everywhere, inside me now, pulsing with my heartbeat. Don't fight it, not Grandma Ruth said gently. It's easier if you don't fight. Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll help us call others. Their names are already rising in your throat. She was right. I could feel them. Names bubbling up from somewhere deep. Sarah Michelle Foster, Marcus Chen, Tyler James Brennan. Not just their names, but everything about them. Their fears, their secrets. Their essence distilled into syllables I could speak into existence. That's it, the figures crooned. Let us in. Let us grow. The blue light grew brighter, so bright it hurt. I was dissolving, becoming part of something vast and hungry and ancient. In moments, I would be gone, just another echo, another whisper in the dark. Rebecca! Tyler's voice cut through everything like a blade, real, solid, human. The blue world shattered. I was back in the forest, on my knees at the edge of the mushroom circle. Tyler had his arms around me, dragging me backward. The mushrooms pulsed angrily, their glow flickering like dying light bulbs. Don't look at them, he said urgently. Don't listen. They're not what they seem. But I could still hear them. Fainter now, but there. A chorus of names being whispered into the night. Sarah Michelle Foster, Marcus Chen, Tyler James Brennan, and one more name, a new one, fresh. Rebecca Ann Thornton. Tyler half carried, half dragged me back to the cabin. My legs felt like jelly, and that blue light still danced at the edges of my vision. He slammed the door behind us and immediately started pushing the heavy bookshelf in front of it. Help me, he grunted. We need to barricade everything. Tyler, what the hell was that? Not now. Help me first. Something in his voice, pure terror barely held in check, got me moving. We shoved furniture against all the doors, drew the curtains tight. Tyler even stuffed towels under the door gaps. The whole time I could hear it. That whispered chorus of names getting louder. We need to wake the others, I said. No. Tyler grabbed my arm. They can't know, not yet. If they know, it makes them vulnerable. The mushrooms. They feed on recognition, on understanding. The more you know about them, the stronger their pull becomes. How do you know all this? He looked at me then, really looked at me. And I saw the haunted expression in his eyes, because I've seen them before. Different forest, same things. I was 12, camping with my scout troop near Mount Rainier. One of the kids, Danny Morrison, he found a circle just like that one. Touched them before anyone could stop him. Tyler sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair. He vanished for 3 days. When they found him, he was different. Knew things about people he shouldn't know, private things, secret things. He'd whisper names in his sleep, and whoever's name he spoke, they'd disappear within a week. That's impossible. Is it? He gestured toward the barricaded door. After what you just saw? I wanted to argue, but the memory of that blue place, those familiar faces that weren't quite right, stopped me. What happened to Danny? Institutionalized. Last I heard, he was still there, still whispering names. They keep him sedated most of the time because when he's awake, Tyler shuddered. When he's awake, he tries to get back to the forest, says the mushrooms are calling him home. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the rain had stopped, making the whispers seem louder. I could make out individual voices now. My grandmother, my teacher, all those dead faces speaking living names. "Why didn't you warn us?" I asked finally. "Would you have believed me? Hey guys, don't touch any glowing mushrooms in the forest because they're actually some kind of parasitic consciousness that feeds on human memories." He laughed bitterly. I didn't even want to come on this trip, but Marcus insisted, and I thought maybe I was crazy. Maybe what happened when I was 12 was just trauma, false memories. Until I saw you walking toward them. "They knew my name," I whispered, "my full name. Said my family had roots here." Tyler's face went even paler. "Family connection, that's bad, really bad. It means they've been waiting for you specifically, calling you home. Home to what?" Before he could answer, we heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate. Too heavy to be Sarah, too light to be Marcus. "Did someone else come with us?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tyler shook his head, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. The footsteps moved across the floor above us, stopping directly overhead. Then, in a voice that was almost but not quite human, we heard, "Tyler James Brennan. We know your name too. We remember what you tried to forget." The light bulb above us exploded in a shower of sparks and blue light. In the darkness, Tyler grabbed my hand. His palm was slick with sweat, trembling slightly. We could hear movement now, not just from upstairs but from all around the cabin, scratching at the windows, tapping at the doors, and underneath it all, that constant whisper of names. "We need to get Sarah and Marcus," I said. "Get to the car. Get out of here." "It won't work." Tyler's voice was hollow. "I tried to run before, with Danny. The scout leaders packed us all up, tried to drive away, but the road kept leading back to the same spot, like reality was broken. We drove for hours and never got more than a mile from camp. A door slammed upstairs, then another and another, far too many doors for a cabin this size. 'Sarah,' I called out. 'Marcus?' No response, just more footsteps, more doors. The sound was multiplying, echoing, becoming a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. 'They're creating spaces,' Tyler whispered. 'Doors that shouldn't exist. Rooms that weren't there before. The mushrooms, they don't just feed on memories, they use them, reshape reality based on what they've absorbed.' As if to prove his point, I noticed a door in the wall beside us. A door that definitely hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. It was painted avocado green to match the kitchen appliances, but something about it was wrong. The dimensions were off. Too tall, too narrow. And the doorknob. The doorknob was pulsing with blue light. "Don't," Tyler warned, but I was already reaching for it. I had to know, had to see. The knob was warm under my fingers, almost alive. I turned it slowly, and the door swung open to reveal my childhood bedroom, perfect in every detail. The unicorn wallpaper I'd picked out when I was 7, the canopy bed with its pink ruffles, even my collection of Beanie Babies arranged just how I'd left them. But the window, instead of showing my old backyard, the window looked out onto that same dark forest. And in the distance, getting closer, was a spreading blue glow. "Close it!" Tyler yanked me back, slamming the door. But when I looked again, there were 2 doors now. Then 3. Then 5. All slightly different. All wrong. "We're losing," he said. "They're rewriting the cabin. Soon there won't be anywhere left that's real." That's when we heard Sarah scream. Not a normal scream. This was primal, terrified, the kind of sound that makes your DNA remember why we used to huddle around fires at night. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through doors that shouldn't exist. "Sarah!" I ran for the stairs, Tyler right behind me. But the stairs weren't right anymore. They went up and up and up, far higher than the cabin should allow. At each landing was another door. Behind each door was another scream. Sarah's. Marcus's. Voices I didn't recognize. We climbed until my legs burned until the air felt thin. Finally, we reached a landing that looked familiar. The hallway to the bedrooms. But there were too many doors here too, stretching in both directions like a hotel corridor. "Which one?" I asked desperately. Tyler closed his eyes, concentrating. "The real one will feel different. Colder. The mushrooms can't perfectly replicate life. There's always something missing." I touched each door as we passed. Warm, warm, warm. Then, there. The master bedroom door was cold as ice. We burst through to find Sarah and Marcus huddled in the corner. But something was wrong with Marcus. His eyes were that familiar blue, and when he spoke it wasn't his voice. "She fought so hard," the thing wearing Marcus's face said, "but we know her name now. Sarah Michelle Foster, born June 3rd, 1998. Afraid of spiders, allergic to shellfish. First kiss was with Tommy Chen behind the gymnasium in 8th grade. "Stop it," Sarah sobbed. "Marcus, please." "Marcus is learning," not Marcus continued. "Learning what we are, what we've always been. The forest remembers everything, Sarah. Every person who died here, every name spoken in these woods. We grow from death, but we hunger for life." He took a step toward us, and I saw the blue spreading under his skin like veins. "Don't let him touch you," Tyler warned. "Once they're inside someone fully, that person becomes a conduit. They can pull you into the network through physical contact. How do we stop them?" I demanded. "I don't know. I've been running from them for 15 years, avoiding forests, staying in cities. But they called me here anyway, through Marcus. He kept talking about this trip, this cabin, like it was his idea. But it wasn't, was it?" Tyler glared at Not Marcus. "You've been planning this." Not Marcus smiled with too many teeth. "The network grows, city by city, person by person. Soon we won't need the forests. Soon we'll be everywhere, in every shadow, behind every door, whispering every name." That's when I remembered something. A detail from those family stories. My great-great-grandfather's logging camp. How it had burned down. How he'd barely escaped with his life. "Fire," I said. "They're fungi. They burn." Tyler's eyes widened with understanding. We had the same thought at the same time. The stone fireplace downstairs, the pile of old newspapers, the ancient can of lighter fluid in the garage. "Sarah," I said urgently, "we need to go, now." But she was still staring at Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "I can't leave him. That's not him anymore." "You don't understand," she whispered. "I can hear him, the real him. He's still in there, screaming." Not Marcus tilted his head. "She's right. He screams so beautifully. Would you like to hear?" And then Marcus's real voice burst through, raw and terrified. "Help me! Oh God, please! I can see everything. I can see how it ends. They're going to—" The thing cut him off, blue light flashing in its eyes. Enough time to add to our collection. It lunged for Sarah. Tyler threw himself between them, and Not Marcus's hand landed on his shoulder. The effect was instantaneous. Tyler convulsed, his eyes rolling back, that blue light spreading from the point of contact. "No!" I grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it like a club. It connected with Not Marcus's head with a sick crack. He staggered back, black ichor leaking from the wound. "Run!" I screamed at Sarah, dragging the convulsing Tyler with us. We half fell down the impossible stairs, doors slamming open and closed around us, revealing glimpses of other places, other times. I saw my office in Seattle, Sarah's childhood home, a logging camp from a century ago where men in suspenders ran from spreading blue fire. Finally, we crashed into the living room. The furniture we'd used as barricades had been rearranged into a perfect circle. In the center, growing through the floorboards, was a cluster of those glowing mushrooms. "They're inside," Sarah gasped. "They've been inside all along." Tyler's convulsions were getting worse. I could see the blue spreading under his skin, racing toward his heart. Behind us, footsteps on the stairs. Not just one set now, dozens. All those doors opening, all those echoes walking free. I made a decision. "Get Tyler to the car," I told Sarah. "Try to drive. Even if the road loops back, keep trying." "What about you?" I looked at the mushrooms growing through the floor, at the lighter fluid in the garage, at the spreading blue glow that was coming from everywhere now. "I have roots here," I said. "Family connection. Maybe that means something. Maybe I can stop this." "Rebecca, no. Go!" She dragged Tyler out the front door. I heard the car engine start, tires squealing on gravel. Then I was alone with the whispers and the glowing circles and the sound of impossible footsteps getting closer. I grabbed the lighter fluid, doused everything. The mushrooms, the furniture, the walls, the carpet. The thing that used to be Marcus appeared at the bottom of the stairs, black ichor still dripping from its head. "You can't burn us all," it said in that layered voice. "We're in the soil, in the trees, in the rain that falls, and the streams that flow. We are the forest remembering itself." "Maybe," I said, flicking my grandfather's Zippo open, "but I can try." I dropped the lighter. The world exploded into orange and blue, two different fires fighting for dominance. I ran, crashing through the back door into the forest. Behind me, the cabin burned with colors that shouldn't exist. But the mushroom circles were everywhere, hundreds of them, thousands. A fairy ring the size of the entire forest, all pulsing in unison. And from each one, figures were rising. Echoes, memories, the dead walking in borrowed flesh. I ran deeper into the woods, the whispers following me. They spoke every name I'd ever known, every person I'd ever met, every connection I'd ever made. And with each name, I felt myself getting lighter, emptier, like they were stealing pieces of who I was. That's when I understood. The mushrooms didn't just want our bodies. They wanted our connections, our networks. Every person we knew became a door they could walk through. Every name we remembered became a thread they could follow. I was being hollowed out. Soon I'd be just another echo, calling names in the dark. But then I heard it. Through all the whispers, through all the false voices. Tyler's real voice, weak but human. "Rebecca, the road, it's working. The fire broke their hold." I ran toward his voice, crashing through undergrowth. The figures followed, reaching out with hands made of memory and hunger. Behind us, the fire spread from tree to tree, but it wasn't normal fire anymore. It burned blue at the edges, consuming and transforming. I burst out of the tree line to see Tyler's car stopped on the road. Sarah was behind the wheel. Tyler slumped in the passenger seat. His skin still had traces of blue, but it was fading. "Get in!" Sarah screamed. I dove into the back seat as she floored it. In the rearview mirror, I watched the forest burn with impossible light. Figures stood at the edge of the road, watching us go. Some wore faces I recognized. Some wore faces that hadn't been born yet. One of them waved. It looked like me. We made it back to Seattle just as the sun was rising. None of us spoke during the drive. What was there to say? Tyler was hospitalized for what the doctors called an unknown toxin exposure. Sarah and I were treated for smoke inhalation and released. Marcus's body was never found. The official report blamed the cabin fire on old wiring. 3 campers safely evacuated. 1 missing, presumed dead. But I know the truth. We all do. Tyler moved to Arizona the next month. Somewhere dry, somewhere far from forests. Sarah went to therapy, got prescribed pills that helped her sleep without dreams. We don't talk anymore. The memories hurt too much. And me, I stayed in Seattle, I work, I eat, I sleep. I pretend everything is normal, but sometimes on rainy nights I hear them, the whispers, growing stronger. They know my name, you see, my full name, and names have power. Last week I found a mushroom growing in my shower. Small, pale, not glowing yet, but it whispered, and I recognized the voice. It was mine. So, that's my story, every word of it true. And if you don't believe me, well, I don't blame you. I wouldn't have believed it either, not before. But let me ask you something. Have you ever walked in a forest and felt like you were being watched? Ever heard your name on the wind when no one was there to speak it? Ever noticed how some missing persons cases just stop being investigated? The mushrooms are spreading, city by city, person by person. They know our names now, all of our names. And they're so very patient. Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing. If you're listening to this late at night, if you're alone in the dark, you might want to check your bathroom. Check the corners where it's damp. Check behind the toilet where no one ever looks. Because I bet, just maybe, you'll find something growing there. Something that glows. Something that whispers. Something that already knows your name.